Deathworlders to the Extreme by Aqua Star Dark. Chapter 20 Cooking. Summary. Shinto gets food, and Aizawa gets heart attacks and discoveries. Shinso is being weird. Shinso is being weird, thought Shota, as he watched Shinso smash a couple rocks together before doing the same with a couple different ones. Are they playing? Playing? Why are they hitting them against each other? Maybe if he wasn't as tired, he could figure out a more eloquent conclusion. But considering he was suffering from extreme sleep deprivation, that seemed nigh impossible for the time being. Sinsel growled at the two rocks they'd been hitting and tossed them aside before lying down for a moment, staring up at the sky. Shota offered a light purr, though he had no idea what he was comforting Shinzo for. Shinzo replied in kind with their own, before sitting up and returning to their task, he supposed. The sound of rock hitting his rock was loud, Shota had to admit. But he did have to admit that it faded out with the scenery after a while. Shota hadn't realized he'd fallen asleep until he woke up to find the surrounding campsite to be transformed as darkness began to descend and find Shinzo approaching with large pieces of wood in their grasp. The campsite now had a circle of rocks, near which was a pile of wood. Oh, stars, the Deathworlders' obsession with rocks and sticks has gone out of control, bemoaned Shota, as Shinto removed their outermost clothing and wrapped their supplies in it before shoving it to the side. Are they preparing for the night? It was possible that Deathworlders became more dangerous during the night, and that was why Shinto was putting so much effort into preparing when they should have been sleeping. I doubt we'll be sleeping tonight. Shota stood, staring at the large armored Deathworlder that entered their campsite, chittering. It crawled low to the ground on dozens of miniature legs and approached the pile of wood that Shinto had earlier set up. A Deathworlder? Now? No. Shinto glanced at Shinso, who stared at the Deathworlder as well. We're both injured. There's no way we can find an actual Class 7 Deathworlder, even if Shinto's from a Class 5. Shota whined and tugged insistently at Shinso, tail whipping as the Deathworlder began to eat the pile of wood that Shinso had earlier created. We need to go. We need to run while it's distracted. Fortunately for Shota's nerves, Shinso allowed him to pull them away, as another Deathworlder joined in the first in devouring the wood. But then, Shinso began to approach them, stick in hand from behind, and Shota could do nothing but stand frozen. Slag it, what are you doing? The Deathworlder chittering as Shinso approached, but luckily didn't attack, and Shota felt himself relax. Maybe they're non-aggressive. How many creatures here has Shinso interacted with anyway? Shota watched, and Shinso raised the stick over the Deathworlders, staring at them. What are they? Shota felt his heart skip a beat, as with a sudden explosive speed, the stick pierced through the first Deathworlder's armor like water, and quick as lightning, the second found itself facing the same fate. What? Shinto threw the stick with two dying Deathworlders to the ground and leapt closer to Shota, who could only stare in a horrified shock as life slowly drained out of the Deathworlders. Oh, that's what the stick was for. Intersected Shota's mind as he stared as Shinso chattered along at him. Lifting the pace for their arms, they removed the Deathworlder from the stick. They killed the Deathworlders, thought Shota numbly as he sniffed at the two corpses, before Shinso shooed him away. Is Shinso going to eat them? It couldn't have been safe to eat the meat of a foreign planet. Who knew what kind of bacteria made its home in its flesh? But maybe it was different for Deathworlders? Shinzo wandered back into the wreckage, likely to collect more sticks and rocks for whatever reason, and Shuttle felt himself collapse on the ground. This was more than he had expected when he had left the bay. Had it only been a few cycles ago? He couldn't be sure. So much had happened since then. If Hisashi or Nanamuri found out how little I know about surviving here, well, they'd have a fit. Shota sniffed again at the corpses as Shinzo dropped off some more supplies before wandering off again. It's so different from the regular planets I've lived on. Nothing tries to deal with me except other sentience, and the supplies I already have are more than enough. If not, I can just go hunting without worry if what I eat has bacteria clinging to it or not. Particularly since compared to most non-death worlds, Vimus are resistant to most, if not all, poisons. Here, on the other hand, Shota glanced over as Shinzo carried around what reminded his ship to their campsite. There's a lot more to be done, and I don't know how I can be of any help. It was hard to admit, particularly considering that Shota typically took such pride in his ability to adapt, but that wasn't something that seemed to apply to Death Worlds, unfortunately. Shadow shifted near as Shinzo replaced the rock and metal in the center of the circle with dry grass and miniature sticks, and watched as Shinzo placed two large deathworlders on the metal. Maybe there's something I could do to help. Then, as darkness began to shroud the wreckage, Shinzo hit the light and the rock and the metal together. Shota leapt back, arms screaming as bright sparks exploded into existence from a simple action, and realized with sudden horror exactly what Shinzo was doing. Fire. They're going to create a fire. Fire! Shota hissed, backing up to the edge of their campsite as once again the metal and stone collided. Shinzo glanced at them and purred, to which Shota only replied with a hiss. He could feel his fur rising under his armpits with every strike until suddenly the grass caught fire. Every instinct in Shota screamed at him to run as the flames leapt from one strand to another until eventually spread to even twigs. And it was only his training a reminder that far more dangerous creatures existed in the area that held him back from sprinting into the undergrowth. Shota desperately wanted to grab Shinto and pull them away from the fire, if not the fact that Shinto was the one nourishing and likely the only thing controlling the fire as well. Shinto purred at him and gestured for him to come closer as the fire grew, but Shota only stayed in the corner, as far as safely from the fire. Thanks, but I choose life, he thought, gazing upon the death worlder that was tending to one of the nature's most uncontrollable features. Shinto chirped at him before turning away and adding more wood to the fire, which greedily leached into the fuel like ravenous predators. On and on, the fire grew in strength as Shinzo attended and Shota began to realize something about their species. Deathworlders, or at least Shinto species in particular, had evolved with fire at their side. After all, what other reason could there be for Shinzo to stare so enraptured at the flames, or be able to cultivate the sparks without sprinting off into the trees? It was both spectacular and horrifying to think about such a thing. Maybe we've been thinking about Deathworlders all wrong. Instead of life on them constantly struggling for survival, they evolved to surpass such limits and developed ways to go even further than that. Literally the epitome of plus ultra. Wow, no one's gonna believe me when I tell them this. Thought Shota, as he watched Shinzo stare at the flames for a moment before promptly sticking the piece of metal with the bugs on it on the fire. They're cooking? They're cooking? The flames now covered. Shota was able to muster the courage to approach such a peculiar and magnificent sight. Although a species and several others had developed cooking at one point or another, it was typically something developed after centuries of technological advancement with safety regulations that went through the roof. One of the foods that UA offered, cooked meat, was practically a delicacy, and yet it was served every day. It was great, of course, to eat meat, and though there was little to no chance of any bacteria surviving the process of cooking, even so, Schunzel's cooking in the wild.